It is Sunday, May 21st, 2023, and Eric Wiese and Michael Cesarz are interviewing Mrs. Mary Cesarz, Michael's grandmother, for History-Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Memory Project. Hi.
Hi.
So, we're starting off simple. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, June 6, 1944, D-Day.
That's of significance.
Yes, it is.
So, what was it like when you were born? Were your parents dual income, or was your dad working and your mother, was she a stay-at-home mother?
No, my mother had to work. My father worked, but she also worked to help pay the mortgage. And my father was a freight agent. He got business for the Wabash Railroad. And my mother, for most of her career, was the receptionist and switchboard operator for the Milwaukee Braves.
I think we'll get back to that later.
Yeah.
Did you have any siblings when you were born?
One brother, 2 years older.
2 years older. So, do you have any younger siblings then?
No.
No. All right, so you were born in the north side of Milwaukee?
Yes. 12th and Capitol, right south of Capitol Drive.
Were the people in your surrounding area, what of European descent were they?
Mainly German, some Irish, but mainly German.
And then is that your ancestry as well?
No, I'm Irish and Polish.
Irish and Polish. So, what is your... So you said your father worked for a freight company?
Well, the Wabash Railroad, the freight cars that you see on the trains today that carry stuff all over the country, he worked for the Wabash Railroad, and he would go out and get business for them to fill the freight cars.
Nice.
And he traveled a lot in the state to do this.
What was that like? Did you see him a lot when you were growing up?
Not in reality. He would work in the office on Monday, and he would leave Tuesday morning and go out of town and come back Friday night.
Where did he go out of town?
Just all over the state of Wisconsin, but back then he would drive and stay overnight and make calls to different companies to get business. He was a traveling salesman in a way.
When he was gone, was it your mother? Were you staying with her still?
Yes, there was my brother and my mom and I, and we had people who lived upstairs. We had a duplex, and that's the way it just always was.
Did you have any cousins or aunts and uncles that you?
One or two uncles in the city, but they were all older, and the cousins, I have tons of cousins, but not in Milwaukee. My father was from Pennsylvania, my mother from Upper Michigan. My father was one of 11, and my mother the youngest of 13.
That's both large families.
Large family.
What brought them to Milwaukee in the first place?
My mother came from a farm in northern Michigan, and she and her sister came here. She went to secretarial school because she never finished 6th grade, so she came here and went to secretarial school, and my dad came from McKeesport, Pennsylvania here for his job.
Was he with the same company then?
When he came here, yes, he worked 45 years with the Wabash Railroad.
So, now we're going to go into more school age. So, where did you go to grade school?
Holy Angels Catholic grade school it's really off of 11th and 12th in Capitol. It was just south of Capitol.
Was it all girls?
No, grade school, no. And then I went to Messmer High School, which is on Capitol Drive. And at that time, there were at least 1,000 students there. It was a big school, Catholic, co-ed.
At the time at Holy Angels, was it a lot of people from the surrounding area, your neighborhood?
All of them. Mm-hmm.
And it was all Catholic?
Yes.
So it was a lot of the Irish and German and
Mm-hmm.
Polish ancestry?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything standing out from those days?
Well, I did tell my grandson that I was expelled from 8th grade.
Oh.
Back then, they were really strict. And I was standing with a few girlfriends on the playground and the boys were playing basketball, and the principal's sister didn't like that we were so close to where the boys were playing basketball. So she came out and told me I was expelled.
Oh.
But that's okay.
Did that stay in effect for long?
No, I think my mother wound up calling and I got back in a day. But I remember it, obviously.
How did you get to school during those
Oh, I
times?
walked.
You walked? Was
Yeah.
it a long walk?
No, it was a block.
Oh.
So I'd go home for lunch and walk back.
Is that how most people got there?
Yes, everybody. There were no school buses taking, and there were so many schools at that time, especially even Catholic schools, that everybody walked. Even to high school I walked. I mean, it was 4 blocks, 5 blocks away.
Was the grade school, you said 1,000 kids at the high school, but was the grade school the same size or similar?
Oh, the grade school may have been 200. There were just individual classes for each grade.
And then, so from grade school you went to high school, and so that was Mesmer, St. Rose?
Just Mesmer High School. Yeah, no,
Not St. Rose?
not St. Rose, no.
Was, did everybody from your grade school pretty much go to Mesmer?
No, and a number of them, probably at least a half or more, went to Rufus King. Because Rufus King was in walking distance also. That was the public high school. It's still around.
Was Rufus King ever a thought for your family to go there?
No, my father was Irish Catholic. My mother was Polish Catholic. That's probably why my mom worked to help. We both go there.
So your older brother had gone there as well.
Yes,
Did he go to the same grade school as you?
yes.
Was his experience different than yours? Did he enjoy it?
He enjoyed it. It was different because at that time there were no sports for girls, but there were for boys, and he was, you know, a jock, and he was the homecoming king and the prom king, and he was very athletic, and so I was his little sister, and so it was different. I mean, it was different for him than it was for me, and after high school, he had a track scholarship to go to Madison. And there is a story behind that because our Catholic principal told UWM not to take him because he was always getting in trouble. But they took him anyway, and he did fine.
So you said your older brother did a lot of sports in high school and
Yeah.
grade school. What did you do to occupy your free time?
I sewed. I made most of my own clothes. I love to cook and bake, which I still do. You know, just hung out with my girlfriends. I would go to the sporting events and watch them. And then we would walk down to the Pig and Whistle custard stand where all the kids from Messwood would go after the games and have a cherry Coke and french fries.
Were those cooking and baking, were those things that your mother taught you, or were those school classes?
No, they're things my mom taught me, but because she worked, I started cooking probably when I was 9 or 10. She'd leave directions or I'd make dinner. Because to get to the Braves Stadium took her an hour on the bus one way, and then an hour on the bus to get home. So if she worked from 9 to 5, she got home at 6, and she left at 8 in the morning. So I guess that's where I actually learned to love to cook.
Is there anything in particular you remember making during those years?
I remember what my mother made. They were caramel rolls, baked. She'd make homemade strawberry jam, which I will do. A lot of baking, cookies, cakes. Not a lot, there was just my brother and I, but I think I remember doing it and helping. Helping doing the laundry at that time. There weren't automatic wash machines. My mother had a wringer washer. So on Monday nights, we'd go down and help her with the wash.
What did you do with your girlfriends?
Oh, what did we do? Well, one of the stories I mentioned to Michael is we walked from 12th and Capitol down to Oakland and Capitol, or took the bus, and then we'd rent tandem bicycles, and bicycle all the way out Lake Drive, just to look at all the beautiful homes. And it wasn't because we were envious, it was just such a fun thing to do. Or we would take our dogs, my one good friend, we both had Cocker Spaniels, and we'd take them for a walk and go to the park and play.
What park was that at the time?
Estabrook Park
Oh.
and Lincoln Park down off Capitol by the river. Milwaukee River runs right past.
Yeah. You said, what was the name of the ice cream stand that you would go to after football games?
Pig and Whistle.
Pig and Whistle.
Oh, it was very popular. Ask anyone my age, I mean, it would just be packed, 'cause everybody would go there after basketball games or football games and get an ice cream, and that's what kids did back then.
Did that continue through high school?
That was through high school, yeah, definitely through high school. It's no longer there, but yeah, it continued through high school.
Were you a part of any clubs or other extracurriculars through Mesmer?
Mainly student council. I was always elected to student council, and then I was on the school vice president. And so, yeah, I spent time doing that. And like I say, just going to the different events.
Were there any other responsibilities with that?
With the student council? Oh, there were meetings. In fact, that's how I met my husband, because it was during the summer then. I had to go over to the south side, which was the other end of the city, for a student council meeting, and that's where I met Mr. Cesarz.
Oh. Was that for like a county, like all the student
All
council?
the Catholic student council leaders.
So where did Mr. Cesarz go to high
Don
school?
Bosco,
Was that all boys at the time?
yes. And if it were still around, my sons probably would have gone there instead of Marquette, because he loved Don Bosco.
So he was from the south side.
Yes.
Was he Polish?
Mm-hmm. And, back then in Milwaukee, there was the viaduct, from the north side to the south side, and they didn't mix. And so, to go there for the student council meeting and then to meet someone, I was the first person on the north side of town anyone in his family ever dated.
Oh.
Because I was Irish and Polish, and they were all Polish, so,
When you first started dating, do you remember what you would do with him?
Well, we were friends, actually. When we first met, we just became friends. It wasn't a date as such, I guess it was. But I can't even remember. Go to the movies. Maybe go to one of the events at school, but we became friends, and I didn't go out with him that much until, I was out of college. But we remained friends all those years.
So outside of school, what did you do during high school? Did you have any jobs or?
I did. Well, I actually started a regular babysitting job in 8th grade, 3 nights after school. And I went from that to working for a bakery, Pete's Bakery. And I worked there part-time through high school. That's when bread was 27 cents a loaf. Donuts were 7.
During 8th grade, who were you babysitting for? Was it for neighbors? Or?
A family, a young mother who had to work part-time, and so I would go over after school. And she lived in a little 3-room upper flat. And she had 2 children. And one of them had a severe birth defect. And I remember when we'd take them out for a walk, and people would always kind of look. It was a growing experience. They were really sweet kids.
And then Pete's Bakery, was that also close by to where you lived?
That was about a mile away, but I could walk. And I love to bake, so I love food. I had to really train myself not to eat all the donuts because I did love it. In fact, if I could have made money there, I would have worked there through college rather than at the bank.
So then you started working at the bank after Pete's Donuts?
Yes, after I graduated from, when was it? It was after I graduated from high school, because I had to work when when I was in college.
And
So,
what bank was that?
M&I. It was the big one downtown. And I worked in the bookkeeping department, which sounds impressive, but it wasn't.
Was it a lot of people your age working there at the time?
There were a couple that were in school, but they were mainly full-timers, and we'd come in after school, and we would file numerically sorted checks at a desk. And I like to work with people, so I sometimes got in trouble for talking too much. But I did that when I started, when I graduated and I started Marquette, that's where I went to college. I was working 20 hours a week, and I was taking courses that I couldn't work that much. At the first semester, I thought, I'm never gonna finish college, and a good Jesuit counselor told me I had to quit working 20 hours a week. And so I did. I cut down to 10 during the school year. I could walk from Marquette down to North Water Street.
So, when you were at Marquette, what was the plan on going to Marquette? Was that something that, like, you had always had in mind of going to Marquette U?
Well, you go back, when I was in 8th grade, I signed a piece of paper and I gave it to my teacher and said, I'm going to become a physical therapist. Because I had a godchild at that time that had cerebral palsy, and once in a while I would take him for his therapy. And there was an Army nurse came into our 8th grade class and showed slides in 8th grade of for nurses. And I knew I didn't want to be a nurse, but she also had some pictures of physical therapists. And I just decided that was what I wanted to do. And the only school nearby, and there were 2 schools in the state, one was Marquette and one was Madison. And so there was no other choice. But the interesting thing back then is that because we didn't have a lot of money, and Mount Mary offered occupational therapy, and Mount Mary was $100 a year cheaper than Marquette. And my father said, why don't you become one of those other therapists? I said, no, I want to be a PT, and I did. And so that there was no second choice about what I wanted to be, and there really wasn't another alternative. And I was a stay-at-home student, take the bus to and from.
Was that a long commute every day?
About a half hour on the bus. And that's when I learned not to worry, because I'd be standing there and I knew class was going to start at a certain time, waiting and waiting for the bus. And one day, it just struck me, you know what? There's nothing you can do to bring the bus faster, so why are you worrying? So I never worried about it, and I usually got to my classes on time. And and now there are schools, I mean, there's so many schools of PT. I was the 10th graduating class at Marquette University with physical therapy. And there were 12 of us in the class. And there must have been, I don't know how many thousands that graduated that year, and there were only 12 of us in PT. That was interesting.
So after graduating from Marquette University, did you continue to work for the bank, or did you start using physical therapy?
No, after I graduated, I became a therapist, but part of what was interesting is I worked 2 jobs the summer before my senior year, so I'd have some extra money. I was able to pay my way through school, but tuition back then at Marquette University was $900 a year. I know, yeah. But then you realize when I worked, I maybe got $1.50 or $2 an hour. So it sort of evened itself out. But I wound up getting a full scholarship senior year, so I had all this money. And a friend and I went to Europe for 10 weeks after graduation. And lived on $2 a day and hitchhiked through England and Ireland and Scotland, 2 girls. Back then you could do that. And then go over to the continent and spent a month, 5 weeks at a U-Rail pass. So it all worked out.
Was that a friend from Marquette University?
Right.
Was she also a physical therapist, or?
No, kids, I don't know what Mary else did. No, she wasn't, and I don't even know how I met her, but we became good friends. And then a year after graduation, because I had lived at home all this time, there were 3 of us that went and lived in an apartment for a year. And I lived with her. And interesting things we talk about, the culture at the time between African Americans and Caucasians, if you will. I lived on 12th and Capitol. And when the riots occurred in the 60s, that's right after I graduated from, or before, around the time I graduated from college, I remember stepping out of my front door down the porch, and there was a National Guardsman standing in the middle of the street with a rifle in his hands, and I was on the inside looking out, because it was to keep the rioters, I think, in.
So at that point, you were no longer living at home, but you're...
That's when I was living at home, yeah, right after that. And, the other thing, if you're learning about culture in Milwaukee, the first black couple moved in right on 12th and Capitol. And I remember someone burned a cross in their yard. I didn't know what segregation was, and I never really understood what that meant, but I do now.
Was the neighborhood around you like, angry that there was an African American couple moving in?
Not that I knew of. See, I went to school. I had friends at Mesmer who were African American. I always walked to and from for the most time with an African American boy that lived in the area. We were really good friends. So I didn't know, maybe because I was brought up in a family that didn't talk about segregation. It just, and I didn't even understand what the cross meant at the time. But I look back on it and I do now. And then the neighborhood did change. But it didn't change necessarily, I don't think, because of the African American family. I think it changed because somebody bought the house next to us that was owned by an old German couple who kept it immaculate. And it was an absentee landlord. I think they were 2 white attorneys, and they rented it out, not to black people. But I remember when the grass was growing and my father, they were talking, and they wouldn't give the people living there a lawnmower to cut the grass. That's when the neighborhood started changing, when people like absentee landlords came in and rented to people, not necessarily black. So it was an interesting time growing up.
When did you, so you moved out after college?
I moved out for a year. I came back home and lived for a year, and then I got married.
And during that time, did your mother and father move out?
No, my father would have had to have been carried out, and literally he was, because he died living in that house. But the neighborhood was changing, and my mom wanted to sell the house and move, and she did that only after I got married, and my father died 3 months before I got married.
You were married when you were 23?
Well, I turned 24 the week after. So I always say I was 24 when I got married.
Where were you married?
Holy Angels.
So
That's where I went to grade school. Very boring. I lived in one house all my life growing up.
Was that, your family, was that a large service?
The wedding?
Yeah.
Yes, because my husband's the youngest of 10 children. And they were all married, and so there were kids and family. The Polish weddings were huge on the south side. They'd serve breakfast after Mass back then to 100, 150 people. They'd serve breakfast, and then they'd have the reception at night with a couple hundred people in a church hall. We could not afford to have both breakfast and dinner. So we had an 11 o'clock service, and then we had a dinner at the Alpine Village, which used to be out here, and had the band, and there were about 150 people. It was fun.
Was it hard to get the people from the south side to come to the north side for the wedding?
They came, but when my husband started dating me, the only way he would come, because he knew nothing of the north side, he would take 27th Street from the south side all the way to 27th and Capitol. I said, Mike, if you go this other way, you'd get here a lot quicker. But he didn't know He didn't know the north side, and so he took one way back and forth. But he learned.
Where did he go to college?
He went to Marquette also. He stayed at home. He was an engineering student. And we weren't dating at that time. He'd call me every once in a while and we'd talk because we were really good friends. Or if there was a wedding in this huge family of his, he would ask me because he knew I liked to polka, I liked to dance. So we were friends until I graduated. We started going out. And he graduated the year after because he was a co-op. So,
What does co-op mean?
that's where students can go to school part-time and work part-time. So he was studying engineering, and Matthew, one of my sons, did this when he went to Northwestern. You go a semester to school and then you work in a company, and he worked for Kearney and Trecker, and so it took him an extra year to go to school. So that worked out well. And we stayed here, and I had been working. I worked at St. Mary's Hospital.
As a physical therapist?
Yeah. Tell you another funny story about this. When I graduated, I wanted to work at the VA because I thought that would really be neat to work with all the veterans. And they told me I'd have a job when I came back from Europe, and I came back 10 weeks later, and the valedictorian from Madison applied. And they said, "We're sorry, but we gave her your job." I thought, well, that's going to be your mistake, not mine. And they were nice, and they told me to go to St. Mary's because the head of the department there was his friend, and I went, and I loved it, and within 2 years he quit, and I became head of the department 2 years out of college. Great experience. Burn unit. Worked in the burn unit, loved that. Just heard a talk at a commencement this weekend down at St. Louis University, and the commencement speaker was a motivational speaker who had been burned over 80% of his body when he was 8. And so listening to him talk and seeing him show his pictures reminded me of working in St. Mary's burn unit. It was special.
How long did you work in the burn unit there?
2 years. 2 years? Yeah, a little over 2 years full-time, and then once I had my first son, I just started working Saturday mornings. But that's, at first, it sounds awful, but it was a great experience. You talk about, I remember this child came in, and he too was burned like 70% of his body, and someone, either on the staff, said, it'd be better if he just died. And I remember the head of the department, Dr. Collentine, saying, you ask him if he wants to live or die. And he lived. And long story, but it was a real interesting experience. Great hospital.
So, where were you living when you were working there?
After we got married, we moved to Shorewood, and we lived right off Oakland and Capitol, Kramer and Menlo, actually. There's a funeral home when you walk over it. We lived there for 2 years, and that's when I had Matthew, and I knew I wouldn't be working full-time. And so we knew if we were going to buy or build, we should do it now because it wouldn't be bringing in that kind of money. And so we looked for lots, and we looked all over, and we didn't find one, and it was just so frustrating. And we got a notice from Mike had written to someone, and there was an ad in the paper, and they showed us this lot, which was a farm field at the time. And we came out, and we built this home. 25 years later, we added on, and we're still here. So I don't know how many people you would talk to that really only lived basically in 3 homes in their life. I grew up in one, lived for 2 years, and have lived here the rest of my life. And my Matthew is now almost 53, so that's how long we've been in this house. Unusual.
So, I just wanted to ask you more about your trip to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned you went to England, Scotland, and Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you go after that?
Well, first of all, the reason we went to Ireland is because a girl from Ireland had lived with my friend for 2 months. and Maeve O'Malley was her name, and she always invited Mary Alice to come back. And that's how Mary Alice asked if I would want to go, and I had all this money saved from working 2 jobs. And so we spent 2 weeks in Ireland, and they partied at night and slept late, and I thought it's no wonder they don't have any money at that time. The country didn't produce much. But then we went over in the U-Rail Pass. We went to France, Belgium, Germany. We went to Germany because Mary Alice also had a cousin in West Berlin, East Berlin, which was the free side, East Berlin.
West.
West, yes. So we went to West Berlin. To get there, you had to take a train through the non-free country of Germany. And I remember sitting in the train, and like you see in the movies, the armed guards came in and checked our passports, and we didn't have visas because we didn't know we needed them. And it stopped at a train station about 10 o'clock at night, and the guy came and got us and sent us off the train to go down a block or 2, and there was still a place where we could buy our visas, and we came back and got on the train and went to East Berlin, and we got off on the wrong end of the train. We took the train, we thought we were in West Berlin, but we were in East Berlin, and we got off the train, and there were all these guys again with their guns walking around, and I thought, I don't think we're in the right place. And so we went up to one of them, and he pointed, we had to go back. So we got back on the train and got off in West Berlin, and you could see there was this big lake, and half of the lake was in West Berlin and half of it was in East Berlin. And there was boating and picnics on the one side, and all you saw were guards or just a big old brick building. The difference between the two was astonishing. So it was interesting. So we went from Germany, we stayed in youth hostels at 25 cents, 50 cents a night. We lived for $2 a day. And you could hop a train, and we stayed in Mussolini's mistress's old house was a youth hostel. Water turned off at like 8 in the morning, and we didn't know that for showering. It was fun. Couldn't do it now. If my granddaughter said they were going to hitchhike through 3 countries in Europe, even now I go, but you can do it. And the trip over there, it was good. Came back, and then I started working. So consequently, all 3 of my sons have done something to be. The 2 of them after graduation went and traveled, and Joe worked for a summer in Poland. And it was just at that time, I think, because they heard of how much fun it is.
So after you had Matthew, you said you were working Saturday mornings?
Saturday mornings, and then back then, there weren't many PTs. And before I graduated, people were calling and offering me jobs. Not only me, my classmates too, because there was such a need. So I then I started just working Mondays too as a consultant for the retired Sisters of St. Francis, because I knew someone who worked there. I mean, you could do that, and then someone asked if I'd help fill in a couple hours a day, and that was the great thing about PT. You could get jobs and not have to work full time, and choose your hours, and not work Saturdays. So that's what I did, and then I started working. I started working 2 days, or I got a contract with a friend as a PT, working 10 hours one week and 15 the next, and I did that while the boys were growing up. And I had Joe 2 years after Matthew, and then 5 years later I had Johnny. And every child I had, I worked the day of my deliveries, which was, I guess, good. So yeah, and then as the boys, I knew were going to go to Marquette, and Marquette was expensive back then, and then there was going to be 2 at Marquette, and so I picked up another few hours working home care because someone called me, and there too I could choose my hours, but I was working those that other job with drug and alcohol abuse patients. That was really interesting. And if you want to know the sickest people in the world, it's people who are drug or alcohol addicted. Because they're not only physically sick, they're emotionally and mentally sick. And I remember a young boy, close to your age, I don't know where he went to school. He was a cute kid, and we had a general exercise program for all these patients. And we had everyone from people who wore the black leather and silver spikes to the bank president of Chicago they brought up. It was a long-term facility, but they said to this young kid, "Don't you feel better being in control?" And he said, "Well," I said, "feels good." He said, "But I like the high I got." And I felt so sorry for him, because the high wasn't going to get him through life. So anyway, it was an interesting, for all the jobs I had and all the burn unit, cancer patients, the people were the sickest at the Paul Bellevue, where I worked for over 10 years. And my grandson's father said to me one day, "Oh, you don't have to worry about me and drugs. You tell me horror stories every time you come home." And I'd help him with his paper route. So I'd come home and tell him the horror stories at work. But it was good.
Where did your sons go to grade school?
They went to Lumen Christi. It was then St. James. So all three of them went there. And the interesting thing is all 9 of my grandchildren went to the same school. So it was kind of nice, because my son Joe and my son Matt lived 10 minutes from here. So they could go to the same grade school. And then they went to Marquette. And the interesting thing about Marquette, because I was working part-time, and before they got into carpools, I would drive them down. Matt, I remember driving Matt and whoever he was with, and the traffic back then was even horrid. And all I remember is, "You chose this. Well, don't complain." So yeah, they went to Marquette.
What was being a mother like during those early years, working part-time? Were you home by?
Oh, I think it was the best thing in the world for the kids. I mean, I worked 5 hours one day, 2 days a week, and then one week, 5 hours a day, 3 days a week. And I was lucky enough to have a woman come in and babysit, or they would go to her house. And I got to go to all of their sporting events. I was home, I finished work at 2 o'clock, so I could be home. I think it was the best of both worlds, because I loved what I did. And I loved going to all their events. I remember rushing to do it. Saddest story I never told my grandsons, but that was when Matthew had to be at either baseball practice or soccer out here when they were younger. And I had a patient, and I didn't get to leave because he kept talking, and I had to drive home, and I'm coming home, and I'm rushing. And there was my son running down Mequon Road to get to his practice. You talk about a guilt trip. It was awful. But he survived, and they all did well. And I was happy and brought in enough money to be able to send him to Marquette. And then on to college. And that's when I really worked full-time.
Outside of sports, what did your sons do?
Outside of sports, I don't think they did anything. Well, I'm serious. There's a neat story about this too, because I'm having 3 sons. Matthew wanted to be on the golf team. And he was really good at golf. And he made it to the last cut, and he said he went to Mass down at school, came out, and he said, "And I was cut." And he said, "But I always have baseball and basketball." And he was the catcher for the baseball team, and he was a really good player on the varsity basketball team. So he was right. Well, then we had Joe, Michael's dad, he's 6'5", so he's 2 inches taller than Matthew. And everybody thought this taller Cesarz kid was going to come and be the basketball player too. And I remember Joe didn't want to play basketball. And so he said, fine. And he liked golf. And the first time I took him to his golf lesson, we're sitting out in the parking lot, and he said, "You know what they're doing down at Marquette today?" He said, they're having basketball tryouts. He said, I'm really glad I'm here. And he went on to be captain of the team, both in high school and college.
Where did you play in college?
He went to Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania. So, and then came Johnny, who tried a little bit of everything. And in fact, he took state in high hurdles, but he fell in love with golf like his brother Joe, and he became captain of the golf team at Marquette and then captain at Fordham. So they all had their own specialties. So what did I do? You might ask what I did when they grew up besides work. I went to sporting events. And now what do? I go to sporting events all the time. In fact, Michael's dad asked me what I'm going to do when Michael graduates and when Helena and Lily, the two youngest girls, because they're in sporting events, he says, what are you going to do when they're gone? And I thought, you know what, I'm sure I'll find something. But that's how life was. I mean, it was work, it was the kids, and it's been really good. Milwaukee, you want to know about Milwaukee? It's a great place to raise a family, I think. Right now, maybe a little on the outside of Milwaukee.
Did you spend a lot of time inside Milwaukee when you were raising them?
No, we were out here. And Marquette. I never knew what it was like to go to a girls' event until I had 6 granddaughters. So no, it was mainly out here.
Were you active at Lumen Christi outside of them being in the grade school?
Yes. If you ask what I did, when Michael's dad was born, I was sitting on the sofa, and Roe versus Wade was on the news. It was just passed, and I remember looking at this little baby, and I thought, that shouldn't be. So anyway, I got real active in Right to Life. I was on the board of directors for Wisconsin Right to Life back then. And then God had a different plan. He brought this missionary priest from Guatemala into our life. And he was just starting a missionary order down there of priests. And somehow, after his being here, he was a really holy man. He didn't even have his seminary built, but we got involved every year. And we became very involved over the last 30 years, and over the last 15, we've had priests and seminarians living with us. They lived here, and the parishioners would teach them English when I went to work. Parishioners would drive them to their mission appeals in nearby states, and they got to know them. And some wealthy parishioners wound up really helping them with their seminary because of an ad in the bulletin. So it was good. In fact, we took, all 3 of my sons went down, and we took our 2 oldest grandsons down to see what it's like living in a third world. People are beautiful. So that was a huge part of our life, and Mike became very active in arranging all their mission appeals for them in the United States, and I did fundraising. So that's basically what we did after the boys grew up. It was good.
What did you end up doing with your free time besides that, once the boys were out?
It was, once they grew up, I think it was a lot of, I worked. I kept on working after my boys graduated, and they all lived out on the East Coast. I didn't know if they'd ever be here. Never asked them to come home, but 2 of them did. And I worked, and my work in healthcare and in home care was like a 9 or 10 hour day. So I worked or slept or cooked. And then Matthew came home, and then Joseph came home, and then they had their families, and then we started Sunday dinners. And all of a sudden, we'd have 17 for dinner for years with Mike's oldest sister and her husband, so that's why we have the big table. and I got to cook. And, but I worked until I was 65.
Where did you work until you were 65?
Oh, the last 20 years I worked for Covenant, which was the St. Joe's system, St. Joe Covenant Home Health. And I was manager of the home care therapy department. And it went from Racine, Menominee Falls, some places. It was a big area that we covered. And when there wasn't enough staff, because we were always oftentimes short, I treated a lot even at that time.
And that was all in-home?
When I'm going to different homes. So I one time had two patients. I had someone on Range Line, big homes, very nice homes. Crabby. I knew. And I had someone on 27th and Titonia in the inner city, and he was crabby. And I said, I would like to have one room and put them both in it and let them live together, because they're extremes, and one's not any nicer than the other. So it was, that too was a learning experience, from the middle of the inner city to the big homes on Range Line. It was interesting. Going up to the farms up in Fredonia. I remember going in, and this farm woman had a chicken in her hand, and she whacked it against a pole. That's how they killed it, that they were going to have it for dinner. It was a little of everything. So I did that, but it's a lot of paperwork. So if you see 7 visits a day, 8, you're doing paperwork for the 2 hours after you get home. And it had to be done because you had to turn it in to get your paycheck. So that's what I wound up doing, and I liked it. I loved it then. And to see how times have changed, there were 12 in my class. I just went down to St. Louis University, and I think they graduated like 70 or 80 physical therapists. Where are they going to work? They're going to water down the profession. But, and then they went to a DPT. And one other thing, through these years when my kids were little, and I worked 10 hours one week, 15 the next, I went back and got a master's degree at night. So I was working part-time and had the kids and went back to graduate school.
Where did you go to graduate school?
I went to UWM, couldn't afford Marquette at that time. And when I applied for the job as manager in home care after that, I had to interview. And there are these people at the table, and they're saying, well, are you organized? And I remember I looked at them and I said, well, 3 kids. I said, I work part-time. I'm going to graduate school. I think I'm organized. And they just said, and I got the job. So those are the things, I guess, when I think about it, that I forget. What did I do? I went back to school, and the kids were young. Couldn't have done it without my husband. Can't do everything.
Where did you say your husband was working during this time?
Oh, for the first 25 years, he worked for Kearney and Trecker. And what sent me back into working more than the 10 hours one week, 12 the next, is during the summer they would close the factory for a month or 2. So he didn't have money coming in. You could collect unemployment. And so someone called and asked me if I would just want to pick up a few hours in work, and I didn't even know what I was going to be doing. And I went to this address. I thought it was going to be a nursing home, and I could do that easily. It was a home care agency. Never did home care. And that's where I started, home care. And I thought, well, if the other therapists and nurses can do it, I can do it too. And I started and went from just doing a few patients, keeping my other job, until I had 2 boys down at Marquette High. And Johnny was in grade school, and I started working more, and all of a sudden they were going to go to college, and Johnny was going to be in Marquette High, and that's when I started working full-time plus.
So So you mentioned before that your mother was, she worked for the Milwaukee Braves.
Yes.
What was she doing for them?
She was their receptionist, like if you'd go in to talk to anybody in the front office, or the players would go through there when they'd come early, so they didn't walk around all the crowds, and so she got to know all the players. And I think the best thing of all of this that I've mentioned was Eddie Matthews was really popular, and my father loved baseball. I can see where my family get it. And my father was in the hospital one time, and Eddie Matthews came to see my dad, out of the blue. And my father was really sick, and I think that he was on cloud nine for a week telling everybody that Eddie Matthews came to visit him. And I've heard that, you know, he became an alcoholic or whatever, but he had to be a good man to go visit the husband of the switchboard operator at the Milwaukee Braves, to go visit him. He'd go to, like I said, my dad would go to every game. The other thing about the Braves, my dad had to go to Texas for surgery because it was the only place they did the type of surgery he needed then, and the Braves brought him home on the plane with the players. And I don't think he ever forgot that either. Those are just some of the nice things that you don't hear about professional sports and what they do. And the other thing was,
the cigarettes with the
funny thing about kids. You ask about kids and what did we do? Well, I did have girlfriends, and again, I said we had a duplex. It had two bedrooms downstairs, but I was designated to the bedroom up in the attic, which was a little room built in an attic, had no heat, but 2 windows, and we had people living in between, and I had a sleepover with a couple of my girlfriends. So at like 1 o'clock, we're all giggling and laughing, and we decided we were going to go get some cigarettes. So we snuck down the stairs, went out, and walked 6 blocks to a laundromat that was open 24 hours, and we bought a pack of cigarettes. And we came home and we snuck back up to the 3rd floor in this tinderbox of an attic and smoked our cigarettes. When my mother heard about that, I thought she'd die. She was afraid we'd set the house on fire. So those were the fun things that we did, and it was fun.
Were those friends from?
They could have been grade school at that. It could have been 8th grade or freshman year in high school. We were young, and smoking was not allowed. My father started smoking when he was 8 years old, he said. He smoked all his life, could never give it up, and died of emphysema. So he always said, do as I say, not as I do. So if he had known we snuck out, I don't think he ever found out. He would have really done something. I don't know what.
So your mother, what was your older brother doing at the time? So you mentioned he went to UW-Madison?
Yeah, but one interesting thing is he did become the ball boy for the Braves while they were here. And he got to travel with them when they went on a road trip. Came home with horrendous stories about what athletes do when they go on road trips. I don't know, maybe he was drinking, who knows what back then. But he never forgot it. He never forgot it. And he loved baseball. I think about this with my grandson. And my son, Matthew, loved baseball, where it came from. And I think they actually got it from my father and the family. And baseball was the main thing in our life because of my mom's job and my father. He'd be home on a weekend, but we always went to baseball games. And my brother loved it too and played for Mesmer.
How did your family take it when the Braves left Milwaukee?
Oh, well, my mom lost. Well, she stayed when the Brewers came for a while, but they were not happy. They were sad. Everybody was sad. There's someone we met 2 years ago who lives down in Illinois, and he loves baseball. He talks about Andy Pafko and Boober Dad and all the Braves. They were a well-known winning team. Yeah, it's fun. He's lives there and never lived in Milwaukee, but he loved the Braves. So I think it was Andy Pafko who was the first baseman.
You mentioned before that you loved to polka. Where did you learn that?
born into you when you're Polish. I don't know, probably from a wedding I went to with Mike. I'm not a good dancer otherwise, but I can polka, you know. They had it, that's what the Polish weddings did. There was really a Polish south side and there was a north side. I don't know, I never thought of, maybe like I said, but there really was a distinction, and out of my husband's big family, he's the only one that married someone north of the Viaduct. And when we came and bought our lot here in Mequon, they thought we were going to the North Pole. Really, because they never came out here.
Did you feel out of place when you were on the south side with him?
No, they were really nice people, so no. They were. I was excited because he was the youngest. He had 7 older brothers and 2 sisters, and I was going to have all these brothers and sister-in-laws that I never had because I only had 1 brother. So no, it was good.
So you mentioned you went to Holy Angels grade school and then Mesmer High School. Were your religion classes there, were they important to you?
I don't know, but there's another story I hadn't mentioned before. Somehow religion, maybe it's my Irish Catholic background. When I was in 2nd grade, I would go and light vigilites in church, but I didn't pay for them because I didn't know you had to. And we had a really crabby pastor at the time, and I was called to the principal's office, and I was 7 years old, and he was sitting there, and I walked in, and he called me a devil. And he said devil, and I'm looking there, and I started to cry. Because I was lighting vigilites without paying for them. And then, of course, getting suspended from the Catholic school, and then telling other parents not to let their kids play with me. Was faith important to me? I think it got me through it. And I would stop in, and yes, faith was the most important. It was very important. My father's family had a lot of religious. My great uncle was the apostolic nuncio in China before the revolution. His great aunt was the head of the Mercy Nuns in Pennsylvania. So it's traditional Irish Catholic background. There was no background because my mother was the youngest of 14 and her mother died when she was 3. And everybody left the farm. My grandfather was kind of a hard taskmaster. So I don't know that side. I don't know where my mother got her faith. But faith was important. So as I lit vigilites, I liked going in, and I liked our Mother of Perpetual Help. And so when I was getting older, my mom would take me up the alley, and we'd go on Tuesday nights to Mother of Perpetual Help services. And I think that's what made, if you look around our house, you will see there are icons or statues or pictures everywhere in this house. And so was it the Catholic upbringing, going to the cathedral with my dad because of Monsignor Kelly down there? I was so proud of him. He was the head usher at the 9 o'clock Mass, and I thought that was really super. So I would go with him sometimes, or else we'd walk up the alley and go to Holy Angels. But it wasn't, I know where I got my faith. I mean, my parents lived it, but my mom had no one to show her. So if you want to ask your parents something, do it now, because you'll forget. And I have no idea how she ever got her strong Catholic faith, and then passed it on, and then was able to share it with the rest of the family. So yeah, that's probably the most important thing in my life.
Was the 9 a.m. Mass at St. John's Cathedral a weekly occurrence for your family?
No, my mom usually would go to Holy Angels because we belonged there, and my dad, being my dad, would usher. No, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks my dad would take my brother and I with him so we could go down to the 9 o'clock Mass and I could see him usher. And then they would have, if they had events, my mom, we would go down.
Were there any like traditions after Mass or something on Sundays?
No, but there used to be a group called, it was a group of men, and I don't know what they called them, but every year they had a St. Patrick's Day party. That was a tradition. And our family would go down there. Of course, my father was really proud. But everyone would say my mother looked more Irish than he did, and he didn't like that. But that was the tradition. Not too much else. My father really wanted my brother to go to Notre Dame, because he's Irish, and he went to Madison. My brother went on a track scholarship. My father was very happy. He played rugby on the side and smashed his nose and lost his track scholarship. So he stayed there. But I think faith has always been in the background because of, again, the Quinn family. The dinners I heard about with my grandmother in Pennsylvania with all her kids, 10 kids, she'd have them over every Sunday for dinner. And that's not why I started here, that we started it in our house here. But I think it's just built in, part of the, I was going to say Irish Catholic, but having dinner on Sunday is an Irish Catholic. But we'd have 10, and then Mike's oldest sister, who was 17 years older than he was. It was like a third generation. So, those were some of the things. I'm sure there are other things that growing up, but it's all been a gift to be out here, to have the kids come home, to have the grandchildren be close by. It's a gift. I don't know many people who have what I have. Seriously. I know one other person who has that many family close by. So, plenty of stories of the kids when they were little. Oh my gosh. You know? I think it was either my son John who drove into the swimming pool with his big wheel one time. I mean, they're just the funny things that happen with the kids. Or my husband pulling his dad around the circle on a new wagon he got for his birthday, and he tipped over and he's bleeding. I mean, just the funny things that happen and growing up, and that you can do when they're close. So and now we're traveling to graduations, all in different areas. So, anyway, I don't know if there's anything else I can think of.
How has technology changed the way, you've been able to communicate with your sons?
Oh, FaceTime is huge, because I do have a son in New York, and he has 3 sons. And we wouldn't know them at all if it weren't for FaceTime. I mean, we see them 2 or 3 times a year, but that's one thing, but we FaceTime every Sunday. And how have things changed? Just the idea, I think this weekend with this graduation for their medical school and all the different careers there are, and the number of therapists, it's changed. And then even when I was retiring the last few years, we did it all by computer, and we'd have to carry them into the home and do our notes, which was hard because patients didn't particularly like that. They wanted you to interface with them, but we did it, and then I had to. So it's changed. The first phone that came out, because I was in home care, it was a box that big that I carried in the car and plugged into the cigarette lighter. And now, in maps, technology, when I worked, we were given a paper map of the county we were going to work in. And you know what a paper map of a county is? And that's when I realized I needed glasses, because I couldn't see the map. And now you get in the car, and we were driving back with my granddaughter, his sister, and you plug where you're going in, and I know I use it all the time, but Mike was asking her about the streets and where she's going. She says, I don't know. She says, I just follow MapQuest, and that's changed a lot. Because I was trying to leave Racine one time at 5:30 after seeing a patient, and I realized I was going the wrong direction when Lake Michigan was on my left-hand side. I probably would have wound up in Chicago, because were seen as terrible for directions. So yeah, there's a lot of good that's with all the new technology, the FaceTime, the telephoning, that know that someone's here. Technology, I wear a smartwatch. I go to the Y. One of my classes, I think it was before I slammed my hand on the floor, and whatever it was dark, and it kept bzz, bzz, and I went like this, I'd shut it off. And the third time I thought, I better look at that. So I had grabbed my glasses, and it was the SOS was activated. And I thought, one more time, and it was going to call for 911 to come and get me, because oh my gosh, are you all right? And I said, yes. So it's good, but the smartwatch, again, SOS, my watch kept doing something funny, and so I kept pushing the buttons, and somehow 911 was set off. And all of a sudden, someone called, and they asked if I was all right. I said, yes, it was just my watch. I don't know what it was. I had to give her my name, my address, the whole thing. And I said, I'm fine. So she transferred me to the police department, and I told the cop I was fine, not to worry. Well, within 2 minutes, there's a cop at my front door. And he said, I just have to check to make sure you're fine. I said, I'm fine, really. I said, but do you know how to fix my watch? And he did, so he showed me how to fix it. Within 2 minutes, my son called, because he's on the list of who to call when you have an SOS call. He said, are you all right? I said, oh my gosh, it was just my watch. So yeah, technology is good, but it was so funny. Now whenever this beeps and I'm not sure of what it's doing, I look at it, and when it goes wrong, I don't set off 911 anymore. But yeah, it's good, That's it. Can't think of too much else. Can't think of it. The hardest part right now, you want to know the hardest part, and I can say that because I have my grandson watching. Tomorrow night is Monday. We have a baseball game tomorrow night. We love going to the baseball games. Well, my granddaughter has a track meet, and she said that throwing discus and shot put are her favorite sport. And so there's 2 of them there. And so Mike and I say, what are we going to do tomorrow night? We might split, and there might be one at one and one at the other. So we keep busy doing stuff like that. I know we can travel more too, so those are the things we do. I think that's pretty much it. The best is yet to come. That's another of my favorites. If you ever want to know my favorite saying, it's the best is yet to come, the last for which the first was made. So you can always, it's always the best is yet to come. Except when you've got 2 events in one night. So I can't think of too much else. Milwaukee's a good place to live, I think. It's a great place to raise a family. Mequon's a great place to raise a family. I went to New York to visit my son. And we pulled up in front of his condo in a taxi, and a woman came out with her dog, and the dog started urinating right in front of the door. And I looked at Mike and I said, that dog is urinating in my grandchild's front door, practically, because there's dogs all over, and oh my gosh. Don't like it. So then they moved out, and his dad lived in it. They lived all over, but they came back here. So I think that's it. We garden. Mike has a wine. He grows grapes, and we make wine. I have a you can shut that off. Because